My friend Daniel is almost 24 and has been dating his GF, Jessica, 30, for nearly 6 years now. They became official 2 days after Daniel's 18th birthday, but have been knowing for much longer than that. Their parents have been friends forever, so the first time they met Jessica was 6 and Daniel was a newborn. But that's not the creepy part. According to the both of them, Jessica has had a crush on Daniel since he was in middle school, and if you do the math, you'll find out she was between the age of 17 and 20 at that time. She used to blatantly flirt with him when he was still a preteen, compliment him, get jealous if a girl his age tried to interact with him, and tell him how she couldn't wait for him to turn 18 and marry him. They are not married or engaged yet, but it seems like they are going strong, so she meant it. If that's not weird enough, they don't look their age. She looks much older, and he barely looks legal, to the point they have been mistaken for mother and son more than once. And while he refers to her as a woman, she refers to him as a kid, i.e., my BF is a good kid. Now, I might be reading too much into it, and they are both adults now, so no one can tell them anything, but to me, it feels like she's into young people. Daniel is really easy to influence, and she groomed him until it became legal. I'm sure he's starting to realize I'm feeling more and more creeped out by his relationship. I don't know if I can act like I find this normal, but I also don't think it's my place to tell him. Relevant comments. You wouldn't be TA, but don't expect a good reception. If he's happy and they have family acceptance, he's not going to take your comments well, even though you're right. You could ask if the age gap bothers him and see if you can work your way in that way, but going right in and saying she's predatory will not go well. Update 1. Context. My friend Daniel, 24, has been dating Jessica, 30F, since he was 18, but she has been grooming him for much longer. So in the end, I didn't did or say anything, someone else did. I need to say, their families don't know about the grooming part, as it happened when the parents were not present. However, Daniel's sister Gemma, 22F, knows, and she is very sensitive to this topic. She was that girl in school who grew big breasts way too early and was constantly sexualized both by our classmates and grown adults. Gemma was never too happy about her brother's relationship. She even tried to make their parents reason about this, but they never believed her. Other than some passive-aggressive comments towards Jessica now and then, she never said anything until she did. Gemma knows I agree with her for what concerns their backstory, so she immediately told me when this happened. She was with Daniel and Jessica, and they were talking about relationships and sexual stuff when Jessica joked about how disappointed she was the first time she slept with Daniel, which, as you can imagine, happened the moment he was legal, because he was much bigger and hairier down there compared to what she had been fantasizing for years prior. Gemma didn't keep her mouth shut and pointed out that what she was saying was that she was more attracted to a prepuberal boy than to a fully developed man, which is creepy. Both Jessica and Daniel downplayed it. She said that she never did anything with a child, because it would have been illegal. That's why she waited years before doing anything. To say this sent a chill down my spine would be an understatement. But it's not over. Later, Gemma had a conversation with Daniel about grooming. She explained what it means and made some very specific examples. Daniel disagreed, because, according to this logic, Jessica would be a groomer too, which Gemma confirmed. Daniel didn't reply, but she could tell by his expression that he was thinking about it, so he might be starting to connect the dots. I don't know how this is going to evolve. Daniel is very codependent, so I doubt he will break up over this, but I think he deserves to understand the truth whether he wants to stay in that relationship or not. Update 2. I followed some of the advice I received on my past posts. I decided to say something with the help of Daniel's sister. So I told him the story of a girl I know who was groomed by an older person, except it was actually his story with some changed details. He was disgusted by this story and agreed it sounded predatory, so I revealed the truth and pointed out it's what happened to him. He tried to defend Jessica, saying it was a different situation, so Gemma bluntly told him she's sure Jessica is indeed a PDF file. This shook him, but he was not convinced, so he decided to confront Jessica about it. She told him me and Gemma were just jealous and manipulative. She tried to play the victim, but when he asked her to look him in the eye and tell him she never had sexual desires involving young, she couldn't. She started crying and confessed what Gemma assumed. She said she feels horrible about it and she never acted on it. She even begged him to stay with her, or she might end up actually doing something illegal and immoral she doesn't want to do. He asked for a break and suggested she gets professional help regardless of how it will end between them. He still cares for her despite what she did. He doesn't think she's a bad person, and it's not her fault if she has a problem as long as she doesn't hurt any child. I only partially agree. She didn't choose to be attracted to young, but she chose to groom a young for years. But it's not my place to judge. Comment. She can't say she's never acted on it when she did, in fact, act on it by grooming him. The fact that she also said she would do something to a minor if she's not with him is insane. She might not have chosen to be attracted to young, but she sure as hell chose to wait years for your friend instead of going and getting help. Update 3. Recap. My friend Daniel, 24 memes, is dating Jessica, 30F. After being groomed by her from the age of 11 to 18, she made some weird comments that made me and Daniel's sister worry, and after he realized that, he confronted her about it, and she admitted she's attracted to very young people, and he asked for a break, despite her begging him to stay. After a few weeks apart, Jessica asked Daniel to meet her to talk, and, being the kind of person who gives everyone multiple second chances, he accepted, expecting to actually have a normal conversation with her. He went to her house, and she spent the entire time begging him to go back to how it was, before he found out about her tendencies. She even begged him to have a child together as soon as possible, describing how beautiful their little family would be. He, of course, said it will never be the same, and he doesn't feel like being her partner right now, let alone start a family. Well, Jessica doesn't take a no for an answer, so without getting into details, she started doing stuff to him while he told her to stop. She's quite small, so he eventually managed to get her off of him, and he left. He decided to finally call it quits, luckily. I didn't expect this whole situation to escalate so much, but I'm glad he's finally aware and safer. I'm encouraging him to go to therapy because he's clearly traumatized. Comments, commenter. She should not be having a child due to her tendencies. If your friend has proof of her admitting she likes young, he needs to go to the police. This woman is a predator and should be locked up. NTA, make sure he blocks everywhere and files a police report. Update 4. So, things took a turn I never expected. Daniel's been acting pretty distant since the whole confrontation with Jessica, and honestly, I can't blame him. He's been through the ringer. He finally went to therapy like I suggested, but instead of getting the closure I thought he'd get, things got even messier. Apparently, during one of his sessions, he started to remember a lot of things from his childhood that he had buried deep. He told me that he's been having these flashes of memory where he feels like Jessica was doing more than just flirting with him when he was younger. Like, she was testing the waters, seeing how far she could push things without getting caught. He can't remember specifics, but he's pretty sure something happened when he was around 14 or 15 that crossed the line. I didn't press him for details, but he looked seriously shaken up. Gemma's been on high alert since then. She even reached out to one of their cousins who used to babysit them sometimes, trying to see if she noticed anything off about Jessica back then. The cousin was shocked and said she always thought Jessica was just being overly protective of Daniel, but now she's not so sure. She remembered a few times when Jessica would get weirdly territorial if anyone else was hanging out with him, even as a kid. Then, out of nowhere, Jessica showed up at Daniel's therapy session. I don't know how she found out where he was going, but she literally waited outside the building for him. She was all tears and apologies, saying she's been to therapy too and that she's a changed person, but Daniel just walked right past her. He didn't say a word, just got in his car and drove off. But here's the kicker. She left a note on his windshield saying she was pregnant. I have no idea if it's true or just another manipulation tactic, but Daniel is freaking out. He doesn't want to talk to her, doesn't want to see her, but now he's stuck in this horrible limbo because if she is pregnant, he feels like he can't just walk away. Gemma and I are trying to convince him to get a paternity test and to keep his distance until then, but he's just spiraling. He keeps saying he doesn't know what's real anymore, like his whole life has been some kind of lie. To top it all off, Jessica's parents, who used to be super friendly with Daniel's family, have started making weird passive-aggressive comments whenever they see Daniel or Gemma in town. It's like they're trying to turn this into some kind of family feud. Gemma thinks they're just as messed up as Jessica, and that they knew more about her behavior than they ever let on. I don't know where this is going to end, but it's not looking good. I'm seriously worried about Daniel. He's barely eating, not sleeping, and seems more confused by the day. I never thought things would get this out of control. Update. Daniel's been a complete mess since Jessica dropped that pregnancy bombshell. We managed to convince him to demand a paternity test before doing anything else, but while waiting for the results, things got intense. Jessica's been blowing up his phone, alternating between begging for forgiveness and threatening to ruin his life if he doesn't step up. Daniel's been ignoring her, but I think she got wind of the paternity test request because she suddenly switched gears. Now she's claiming that if he doesn't take her back, she's going to expose him for abandoning his child and make sure everyone knows he's a deadbeat dad. I thought that was the worst of it, but no. She actually showed up at his parents' house with a suitcase, claiming she had nowhere else to go. Daniel wasn't home, but his parents, being the kind-hearted people they are, let her in, thinking she just needed some time to cool off. By the time Daniel got there, Jessica had made herself right at home, acting like nothing was wrong. She was chatting with his mom like old times, and when Daniel walked in, she just smiled and said, "Hey babe, I'm staying here until we work things out." Daniel lost it. He told her to get out, and that she was out of her mind if she thought she could just waltz back into his life like nothing happened. But she wouldn't leave. She started crying, saying she was scared for the baby and that she needed him. His mom, bless her heart, tried to mediate, but Daniel wasn't having it. He called Gemma, who showed up like a force of nature, and dragged Jessica out of the house. I'm not kidding. Gemma physically pulled her out the door and told her to stay the hell away from her brother. But here's where it gets really dark. After Gemma got her out, Jessica started screaming that if Daniel didn't take her back, she'd make sure he'd never be happy again. And then she started ranting about how she was going to raise this child right and that it would grow up loving her no matter what Daniel did. It was seriously unhinged, like she was already planning some twisted way to use this potential child as leverage. Daniel was completely shaken. He's terrified that she's going to somehow force her way back into his life, or worse, that she's going to do something crazy if the paternity test comes back negative. Gemma's been staying with him since the incident, just in case Jessica tries anything else. And the paternity test, well, we finally got the results back, but instead of bringing any relief, it just opened up a whole new can of worms. The test came back negative, which should have been a good thing, right? Except now, Jessica is claiming that the test was tampered with and that Daniel's trying to get out of his responsibility. She's saying she's going to get another test done on her terms and that she won't let him run away from his duties. But the real kicker? She's hinted that if Daniel doesn't play along, she's got other ways of making his life hell. We have no idea what that means, but it's clear she's not going to let go without a fight. Update 6. I wish I had better news, but things have spiraled even further out of control. After the negative paternity test, we all thought Jessica would finally back off, but instead, she's become more unhinged than ever. First off, Daniel did try to get a restraining order. He went to the police with Gemma, explained everything, and they filed the paperwork. But the process is slow, and Jessica must have caught wind of it somehow, because she's gone completely off the rails. A few days after filing, Daniel came home to find his car vandalized. The tires were slashed, and the words "you can't hide" were spray painted across the hood. He didn't see who did it, but we all know it was Jessica. The cops took a report, but without witnesses or camera footage, there's not much they could do. They suggested he keep a low profile until the restraining order was processed, but that's easier said than done. The next day, Jessica showed up at his workplace. She made a huge scene, screaming about how Daniel was abandoning his family and accusing him of being a liar and a cheat. His boss had to call security to get her out of the building, but the damage was done. Daniel's coworkers were gossiping, and his boss, while sympathetic, told him to take some time off until things cooled down. So now, Daniel's out of work, which is the last thing he needed with all this stress. Then last night, things hit a new low. Daniel woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of glass breaking. He ran downstairs and found Jessica in his living room, barefoot and bleeding from where she'd cut herself climbing through a window she smashed. She was holding a knife from the kitchen and sobbing uncontrollably, saying she couldn't live without him and that if he didn't take her back, she'd end it right there. Daniel was terrified, but managed to stay calm. He talked her down, telling her to put the knife away and that they could talk things out. It took a while, but she eventually dropped the knife, collapsing on the floor, still crying. Daniel called the police, and they took her away, but not before she swore that this wasn't over and that if she couldn't have him, no one could. She's been placed in a psychiatric hold for now, but it's not clear how long that will last. Daniel's a wreck. He's scared, exhausted, and feels like his life is unraveling. Gemma's been staying with him 24/7, but even she's starting to crack under the pressure. We found out through mutual friends that Jessica's parents are blaming Daniel for everything. They're saying he led her on, made her believe they had a future, and then abandoned her when she needed him most. They've been spreading these lies around town, and now Daniel's being painted as the bad guy in this whole mess. Even some of his own family members are starting to question his side of the story because of the rumors. The worst part? Jessica's parents are threatening legal action, saying they'll sue Daniel for emotional distress or something equally ridiculous. It's clear they're just trying to intimidate him, but it's working. He's completely drained, emotionally and financially, and he doesn't know how much more he can take. We're all on edge, waiting to see what happens next. Jessica's still in the psych ward, but who knows for how long. And even when she gets out, I'm sure she'll find some way to keep this nightmare going. The restraining order can't come soon enough, but even that might not be enough to stop her. Update 7. Everything came crashing down, and it happened fast. After Jessica was released from the psychiatric hold, she vanished for a few days. No one heard from her, not her parents, not Daniel, not even her few remaining friends. We all thought maybe she'd finally backed off, or at least that she was getting the help she desperately needed. Then one night, Daniel got a text from an unknown number. It was a picture of him and Gemma sitting on his couch, taken from outside his house. The message read, "If I can't have you, no one will." We called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, she was long gone. They found footprints outside the window, but that was it. They told Daniel to leave town for a while, stay somewhere safe until they could track her down. He was already half-packed by the time the cops left. But Jessica was always a step ahead. As Daniel was leaving town, with Gemma following in her own car, something went horribly wrong. Daniel had just pulled out onto the highway when a car came out of nowhere, speeding straight towards him. It was Jessica, driving like a madwoman, her eyes wild, like she had nothing left to lose. Daniel swerved, but she clipped the back of his car, sending him spinning out of control. Gemma, who was behind them, watched the whole thing unfold in horror. Daniel's car flipped, rolling several times before landing in a ditch. Gemma, screaming, pulled over and ran to him, but Jessica wasn't done. She slammed on the brakes, got out of her car, and started running towards the wreckage, still screaming Daniel's name. She was completely out of her mind. Gemma, in a panic, grabbed a tire iron from her trunk and ran towards Jessica, who was now clawing at the wreckage, trying to get to Daniel. Gemma didn't hesitate. She swung the tire iron, hitting Jessica in the shoulder, knocking her to the ground. Jessica was dazed, but before she could get up, the police arrived, sirens blaring. They tackled Jessica, pinning her to the ground as she screamed that she just wanted to save Daniel. Miraculously, Daniel survived the crash. He was cut up and bruised, but alive. They took him to the hospital, where he was treated for a concussion and a few broken ribs. As for Jessica, she was finally arrested, this time with charges that would stick attempted murder, reckless endangerment, stalking. Her parents, who had been enabling her for so long, finally saw the truth. They didn't even try to bail her out. Gemma stayed by Daniel's side the whole time, refusing to leave him alone for even a second. They both knew this was the end of it, but the damage was done. Daniel was broken, emotionally and physically. He decided to leave town for good this time, no second guessing. He needed to get as far away from Jessica and everything she'd done to him as possible. Before he left, he burned everything that reminded him of her. Photos, gifts, anything that tied him to that nightmare. It was like watching him try to erase years of his life, and in a way, I guess he was. Daniel's somewhere safe now, with Gemma visiting him regularly. He's trying to rebuild, piece by piece, but it's going to be a long road. As for Jessica, she's locked up, probably for a long time. But even though she's behind bars, she still haunts Daniel.